Okay, hello. We're going to get started now so that we can be on time and make sure that Kyle Lewis has enough time to give her talk before we then move on to the other things. So I know people are still coming in from breakfast, but I will get started. Welcome everyone to UCTech 2019. That's applause, yay! My name is Eura Szuwalski. I'm with the College of Letters and Science IT, and on behalf, thank you. On behalf of the Planning Committee, I'm here to welcome everyone to the conference. Advance on. This is a pleasure for me to be up here. I'm so excited to welcome all of you. This conference is really only possible because of everyone in this room. You took the time, made the commitment to create a community of IT professionals and people who work with IT professionals. And really, when I started coming to this conference 4 years ago, when I really first started with UCSB, I saw that every campus was unique and different, but this conference showed that we all have commonalities and that we're coming together and sharing and learning. And that was one thing that was important for me, was having a community that wants to share our ideas and wants to grow as a community. So all of you here are showing that. I'm going to take a few minutes to open the ceremony and then hand it off to the first speaker, Matt Hall. And then I'll be back at the end for some more housekeeping, some reminders about today and the rest of the conference sessions. But before I'm going to jump down memory lane. So UCTech, formerly, just so everyone remembers, we used to be University of California Competing Services Conference, so UCCSC. So it was rebranded this year for UCSB, yes, and started in 1982 at UC Santa Cruz. And UCSB has hosted it 3 other times. 1989, anyone? 1999? Yeah, 2008. Nice. So we've had a long history, and we're excited for next year with UCLA to hand the buck over to them as well. And as many of you know who have done this in the last couple of years, especially as it's grown, it takes a lot of people to make this possible. So I want to take a chance to thank those folks. So first, yeah. Yeah, so first off, the Executive Planning Committee, who really helped to make this possible, pushing things along, making sure the planning went smoothly. So Matt Hall, who you will hear from in a bit after me, our executive sponsor, and then our UCTech ambassador, Chris Rosenstock. Yeah. And our project manager, Susie Danko. And I want to make sure that you all, so if you see them throughout the conference, stop them, thank them for the work that they've put into this. It's been many hours of work to make this possible, so please, thank them, shake their hands. It wouldn't be possible without them, but of course it takes a village to make everything possible. So these are all of the 29 conference committee members who worked with the executive committee to make sure you had the yummy crepes that we had last night. The great live band, I saw some people dancing. It was a lot of fun. We have more of that to come. And to bring all of the other, make sure the sponsors were here. All of these committee members have been working. We've been on email chains, we've been working through Slack, we've had Zoom calls, conference calls. So if you see them, we're all wearing these shirts. Stop them, thank them. We're also here for questions, and also our volunteers. This, again, would not be possible without all of these people on this here and who are all here in the audience. Okay. But more thanking. So while there's a village here on campus that's making it all possible, this would also not be possible without the UCTech ambassadors on your campuses. So each of these folks has helped out with making sure you know what's happening for UCTech, that all of the announcements go out. Also helped out a lot with the reviewing the proposals, because we had many proposals this year. So this, again, would not be possible without them. And I know that Chris and all of us are really looking forward to handing this off to Chris Patterson for UCLA next year. So, hey. So, more about here, UCTech 2019. It's grown every year, as you all know. So this year we have more than 730 participants. So that's huge for folks who were here, who said they were here in 98, 2008. I mean, this has really changed. 165 scheduled sessions, over 9 breakout sessions, and 2 days to find that out. So I know everyone's been adding things to their schedules. I know it's tough, but most things will be recorded. I'm reminded that, and we'll be posting them on YouTube unless the presenter asks for us not to. So you can experience the things that you maybe couldn't get to because of the schedule. In the last 2 years, we've added 2 new tracks. So we now have what started last year with the Women in Tech, which we branded as Diversifying IT Culture. And then this year, we added, because of huge rush and excitement from the project management community, we now have what we're calling the Planning and Managing IT Investments, which had a huge number of proposals and a lot of great sessions. So thank you for that, for growing that as well. And I would recommend, even if you don't think of yourself in project management or any of them, attend those sessions too. There's a lot of that we can all learn from that group. I am a project manager, so let's see. And then, so how are we all able to bring you here? Our sponsors. So we also want to thank all of the sponsors who are going to be over in the UCEN lobby with booths. Please visit them. Make sure you stop at their tables. There's a bingo card. I'll talk more about that later as well. But this is really possible because they have helped to support this event and the other events that we'll have in the next 2 days. So thank you for all of the sponsors. And many of them actually are attending as well and want to take part and learn from us. And there are many sessions, so you can look for this sponsor sessions in the sponsor track in the schedule. So make sure you attend some of those so we can support the sponsors who are making this all possible. Okay. And last, before I close out, I want to remind everyone, so our meeting room venues are marked on the venue map, which is in your swag bag. But you can also use map.ucsb.edu, and Google Maps does work too, I should mention that. But this map.ucsb.edu allows you to zoom into specific rooms, and we've tried to, for the most part, mark the room where a session is happening, and you can actually, on your phone, route yourself to that place, and it gives you walking directions. So that's the sort of closeout there. I'll be back at the end with more sort of housekeeping things and make sure everyone's ready. But now it's time for me to hand it over to Matt Hall, to our first speaker.
Thank you, Eura. Wow, good morning. Good morning, University of California. We're so excited to have you here in Santa Barbara, and I have to say it is an honor and a privilege to be a part of the University of California system. I was talking to Dr. Pfeffer last night, and he said, Matt, can you imagine if we took the totality of the talent that we see across UCIT and turned it into a multinational corporation? What we could achieve together would be extraordinary. But we're taking that power, we're taking our intellectual capacity, we're taking our lives and our commitment, and we're putting it into mission-focused IT. We're enabling healthcare, we're enabling instruction, we're enabling research, and it's so important that we line up against the missions we serve. And all of you here have a unique perspective. Santa Barbara is an interesting campus, and they have a unique diversity in our campuses, both within the geographical context in which they're situated. I gotta say, UCSB has some lovely topography, don't we guys here at UCSB? It's a beautiful campus, but every campus has its own unique, let's say, flavor. It's situated in areas of California that represent the totality of the state. So each of you come here, you bring this whole, this energy, this vibrance. It's so exciting when we're together and we learn something from each other. Our context is different, the size of our institution is different, the geographical context is different, but we have so much in common that bind us to the University of California as a system. So although we're on a campus, events like this, really looking at the crowd from this angle, I see so many people that I know and so many people that I hope to get to know. I'm just excited that you all come here to spend some time with us. I do need to reiterate what Eura was saying. The volunteers, they make this happen. It is an extraordinary task, and those of you who've had this and watched it grow over the last few years, Eura and the committee and the volunteers, just look at the people who had to onboard 700 registrants yesterday. So volunteers, thank you. Our sponsors enabled this to happen. And thank you so much for everyone and what you've done there. I'd like to introduce our speaker here. I've got to get him the iPad here, so let's see if I can get my glasses on. This is a good friend of mine. His name's Chuck Haines. He's the Assistant Chancellor for Finance and Resource Management at UC Santa Barbara. For those of you who know the show Game of Thrones, he is our master of coin. And so everybody's got to be really nice to Chuck, make sure he has a warm welcome and a really nice experience. Chuck has been in the University of California system since 1979. He started in housing, he's worked through housing. He did take a right turn, went to a little small university called Stanford for a little while. But he came back he saw the opportunities back here at UCSB, and he went back to housing. He was our housing CFO, and he's had a progressive career. Chuck is a philosopher. He's an awesome human being, and he cares about the mission of the institution. He enables us. Ever since I've been here, Chuck has been an extraordinary partner in making IT more resilient, more secure, and positioning our campus for process innovation, for the ability to do digital transformation. We're now coming out from underneath the water line. We're looking over the water and saying, hey, there's land ho, there's things we can do to transform this institution. So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome my good friend and colleague, Chuck Haines.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's kind of great being up here because I can't see anything out there, so suddenly my nerves are much calmer as I go through this. On behalf of Chancellor Yang and the leadership on our campus, it's my pleasure to welcome you to UC Santa Barbara. I encourage you to make the most out of your time here, both with your colleagues and enjoying our environment here. I want to catch on something Matt just talked about the power of our system. And every time I'm around a group of people from various campuses, I like to remind everyone about the size of the UC. As you may or may not know, California, if it were its own country, would be the 5th largest economy in the world. The UC makes up 13% of the GDP of California. So we're 13% of the 5th largest economy in the world. Our economic benefit to the state is somewhere in the $46 billion range. And 1 out of every 46 employees in the state of California is either a direct employee of the university or working for a spinoff from the university's enterprise. So we are massive, and you guys are running that scene. As a campus CFO, I was a little doubtful about addressing UCTech. After all, I'm the tight-fisted curmudgeon. And why would I want to come to a room full of people who never settle for boundaries or never settle for good enough? The truth be told is it's actually the theme of this event that got me. Matt sucked me in by hitting my weak spot, uncorked, wine. So wine is that thing. So in the same way, opening a bottle of wine is a magical blend of anticipating both the experience of the wine and the company with whom you're going to share it. This conference is that opportunity for us in the University of California to come together and share our experiences, to find our common bonds, and to dream about what is next. The University of California is an incredible, intricate network of research initiatives, academic aspirations, and the thirst for excellence. Technology touches everything we do in the university, and as my colleagues know, I'm in constant search for the source of truth in our various data systems. I need the information and the supporting systems to do my job, so as I look out into this room, I want to pass on a simple message to all of you. The success and expansion of this vast educational empire relies on you. Make the most out of your time here, enjoy our campus, connect with your colleagues, and yank out that cork. Thank you.
I'm back. Glasses are up. You know, when Chuck talks about how we yank out that cork, we have an extraordinary talent pool in our faculty and our staff. But I'm going to introduce to you a woman whom I greatly admire. She's been a great counselor to me. She has a wonderful sense of humor, and something Lisa said to me behind stage today. Kyle Lewis is very accessible in terms of how she relates to people, the topics that she takes that are complex statistical topics and makes them accessible to a broad audience. Kyle is just an extraordinary person. She is the chair and professor of our technology management program in the College of Engineering here at UCSB. She's also a professor at UT Austin, one of my favorite places in Texas. And interestingly enough, I don't know if the Gartner folks are in the audience today, and I didn't know this about Kyle till I was looking at her LinkedIn profile this morning. She was a Gartner Group analyst. Yeah, so this is IT hardcore, computer science degrees, business analyst. This is the real tech deal that Kyle's going to talk about. She has a perspective that I know you're anticipating to enjoy, and she's certainly been an extraordinary influence on my life and how I perceive diversity and how I run my operation at the University of California here at Santa Barbara. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Kyle Lewis. Come on out, Kyle, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Matt. Hello. Thank you, Matt, for such a nice introduction. It's great to see all of you here. And as Matt kind of previewed, I get to talk about some of my favorite things. So technology, people, organizations. And if you're not familiar with our department, we are a small department in the College of Engineering. Most of us have engineering or computer science backgrounds, but we have our PhDs in a social science. So we're interested in understanding how organizations create technology and how technology affects organizations and the people's behavior in them, but also how we study technology people, and that's one of the things I've been doing. So I've been studying technology people and technology groups for about 30 years now. And when I came to UCSB, several people asked me to think about something else, which was the big brain drain, if you will, in tech of women and underrepresented minorities. And I have to say, when this first came up, I was a little bit confused. I had been out of the real world for a while, working in academia, and I got my computer science degree in 1983. And at that time, 40% of the CS degrees were women. I got a job right away. It was a great job. I loved it. Went on to get more interesting jobs, ended up working in AI as an AI product manager, and then went to business school and did what a lot of business school graduates do, is that you try to blur out the tech, right? So you go to business school so you can go to Wall Street or you can work at Kraft Foods, but often MBAs go to school to say, I don't want to be in tech anymore. And this has been a trend that we've been seeing, and I think it's a problematic one, and I have some new ideas about what we can do about it beyond understanding implicit bias. I know all of you have had implicit bias training, so I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to talk about some new research that you may not know about that actually might move us forward and in a new direction. So the title of my talk is Organizational Strategies for Interrupting Bias. This is a big sea change from understanding how human beings behave in organizations and instead flipping that into how do organizations make us behave? And if we change how organizations make us behave, then we may not have to talk too much about bias anymore. So certainly tech has done some great things. So when I wanted to look up the best inventions of last year, I looked at Time magazine, and these were some of my favorites. So training for surgeons, where you have people in virtual reality settings actually working on surgery with haptics, so you get feedback on your fingers, so it feels more like surgery rather than a video game. Drones that drop supplies, medical supplies, food in very remote areas. What about a 3D printer that is printing small homes out of concrete? Takes 48 hours, and they're working on a 24-hour turnaround. And this one at the bottom is from a Japanese firm called Zozo, and what they do is they sell customized clothing, customized to your size. So they send you this jumpsuit with dots all over it, you take photographs of yourself, and they send you back clothes that fit you perfectly. So we have a couple of interesting examples here. So here we have tech really doing a social global good. Here we have tech doing a social or global good. Here we have tech saying, we're all different, and we shouldn't have to buy the same size clothes. So we're celebrating difference in some ways. So in a lot of ways, technology has embraced this idea that we're more than just about making the tech. We are also about what the tech does. We've also had some unfortunate fails in technology, and some of them. The all-women's space flight canceled because there weren't enough small spacesuits. This reminds me of police organizations that didn't have bulletproof vests that were small, that fit small people, or in the military, didn't have safety vests that fit small people. So clearly, something could be done about this, but it's interesting to think about how this all started. Obviously, the people making the suits or designing the suits were not anticipating a lot of diversity in their astronaut ranks. Diversity in size, diversity in gender. This is a really interesting case of facial recognition, which is still a technology that is very, very hard to crack. So the technology is still having very great difficulty recognizing dark-skinned people, especially dark-skinned females. Now, at first you say, well, it's just technologically more different. But you have to wonder, were these machine learning algorithms trained on a data set that was also diverse? Or was it trained on a data set that is very good at recognizing white faces and not non-white faces? Something that makes me very sad, Apple has discontinued its smallest iPhone. Again, small iPhones fit small hands. Will small-handed people want to choose giant iPhones? They don't fit in my pocket. They barely fit in my purse. I like the small ones. There's a lot of noise on Twitter about, what are they doing? They're taking away the women's phone. And again, we wonder, how did they make that decision? What were they thinking about? And it goes along with this last example, which is an example of an app that Apple created. It was one of the first apps that tracked everything from respiration, heartbeat, to even blood alcohol level. But the one thing it didn't track was anything about women's bodies. Which, for women, that seems like an obvious omission. But for the people who were building the system, it's as if they didn't even market validate the product with a diverse audience that may have different needs for tracking. So all of this is to say that, there will always be technology fails, but there are techniques that we can use to prevent this as much as possible. And it's a technique that derives from Agile and Lean that I'd like to talk to you about today. Had we started from scratch and tried to understand what size iPhones or what size phones should we manufacture, you might actually go and ask your customers about their preferences and test out different sizes and find out what the demand is at different sizes. So before you build it, you might actually test something. Okay. So this idea comes from a lot of work in innovation and entrepreneurship. We refer to it as the lean startup method. This is a book by Eric Ries. And the idea here is that when you're building a product or even building a company, you don't want to finish building it and then go put it in the marketplace and cross your fingers. You want to build something that is minimally testable, bring it out to your marketplace and say, do you like these features? What would you use this for? Would you buy this? And then you go through these cycles of learning and building and measuring and learning and building and measuring. So these multiple cycles help you define a product with a better market product fit. And you're less likely to come up with these technology fails. So I'd like to apply this idea that we borrow from entrepreneurship and startups and apply it to some of the problems that we see in tech today. So what if we use ideas from innovation to innovate new organizations? And in particular, innovate organizations that do these three things really well. And if I were to really think about what makes people want to stay in organizations, these three things really pop up in the literature, from sociology to social psychology to psychology to organizational behavior. People want to be used for the knowledge that they have. They don't want to feel like they have knowledge that's wasted. They want to work in organizations that are fair. And by fairness, it doesn't mean giving everybody everything. That means that high performers get more and low performers get less. So it's not equality, it's equity. And they want to work for organizations that create meaning. And I was really happy to see Matt and George talk about this idea that what we're doing here in the University of California is creating meaning in the state and in the world. And if we think about the work that we do in those terms, it tends to motivate people to want to work in our organizations. So I'll come back to these. So in technology today, you may be familiar with some of these stats. It's not looking good. So since 1990, computer professions have grown at an incredible rate, faster rate of growth than almost any other segment, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And of course, the demand for quality workers is just rising because of this fantastic growth. But in too many technology organizations, we're seeing similar patterns. A brain drain at the mid-level, especially among females. So females leave tech organizations, and particular computing-based organizations, at 2 times the rate of male colleagues. And they leave at the midpoint of their career, so about 10 years in. Now, how much knowledge have they accumulated after 10 years? A lot. One of the things I study is what happens when people like this leave organizations. The value of their knowledge goes out the door with them, but there's a lot of knowledge that's embedded in the structure of the organization that she left. Who do we ask for certain things? What do we know about certain things? Uh-oh, Susan knew the answer, but now she's gone. What do? We need to reinvent. So this departure of knowledge is a very, very big problem in organizations, and we don't always track it. Some who have tried to track it think that turnover costs between 2 and 5 times someone's salary. So if you lose a person making $80,000 a year, it could cost you another $240 to replace that person. Okay. Perceptions of inequity and unfairness. These perceptions in tech are there for men and women, but almost, again, double for women. So women and people of color believe that the organizations they're working on are not treating them fairly. And then finally, the climate may be unwelcoming to some. And this is a theme that keeps coming up, and it's very, very interesting because a lot of times these climate issues, they're kind of ambient. We don't really know how to interpret them, and when we understand how they're interpreted, we're kind of surprised. There's a wonderful study that looked at girls who were going to study computer science. And they set up 2 rooms to do a test to see your aptitude for computer science. And you could go into a room that had posters, things to write on, laptops ready to roll. Or you could go into another room that also had laptops and supplies, but also had Star Trek posters and a few really technical books and kind of messy. So trash in the trash cans, Coke cans stacked up. And they watched to see where the students went. And more women than men went into the neutral Q room. More men went into the, let's say, Star Trek room. And the women that went in the Star Trek room were much less likely to say they were going to pursue a career in computer science. It's like, what? I loved Star Trek. I watched Star Trek for years and years. So this is very curious to me. Why? How does this happen? So the social science can help us dig into the why. And when we understand the why, sometimes we can intervene and cut it out from under its knees, if you will, so that it never actually plays out. Just 12% of engineers who are employed in the US are women, and the number of women in computing has fallen from 35% in 90 to just 26%. And in computing, it's one of the biggest or the most precipitous falls of any of the tech sectors. You may have seen this before, but it's a delight. This is a magazine, Cosmopolitan magazine. Some of you may know Cosmopolitan. It's a magazine that's geared towards people who identify as female. And in 1967, the editor wanted to publish this article. And it's an article that's talking about a brand new career that's perfect for women. And, one of the things that it says is a senior systems analyst can get $20,000 a year and up, which was a really huge salary in 1967, right? So interesting, this was the time that Grace Hopper was developing compilers and working on the ENIAC. And here is a quote that I pulled out of the article. "It's just like planning a dinner," Dr. Grace Hopper explains. "You have to plan ahead and schedule everything so it's ready when you need it. Programming requires patience and the ability to handle detail. Women are naturals at computer programming." So here was an interesting statement that basically said, women have all of the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities, that they need to be good programmers. Why? Because they're managing multiple tasks at once. They have to prioritize. They have to think ahead. If you think about coding and programming, all these things are tasks and activities that we do. So somehow between 1967 and now, we've gone through ebbs and flows of the degree to which women are involved in this workplace. And we're in a bad spot now. We've tried a lot. So these organizations at the University of California have tried very, very hard, and I've been involved in some of these activities. This is what we've tried in HR in the past. We've tried to develop bigger pools so we don't have to suffer from this pipeline problem. I can't find the women. Well, you can if you look broader. We select based on job-related criteria, not based on culture fit. When you choose someone based on culture fit, it can mask a lot of underlying biases that really guide your preferences, and you may not even be aware of them. We would try to measure as objectively as possible the performance of people and not just have impressions of performance. We track promotion rates. And we have new family-friendly policies like daycare and flexible work schedules that ought to help prevent women and families from actually leaving this workforce. And finally, we do a lot of training. So raise your hand if you've been through implicit bias training. Okay, so almost everybody here. And this training has done a lot to help us understand implicit biases. The first implicit bias training I took actually made me so interested I decided to keep going. Not everyone feels that way. The interesting thing I'd like you to focus on is that implicit bias training focuses mostly on human behavior. So how do we change the way women behave? How do we change the way men behave? How do we change the way managers behave? If I were to put this, let's say, product or firm idea through this lean startup methodology, I might see it like this. So we have an assumption that implicit biases are the root cause of some of our disproportionate numbers of women and men in our tech organizations. So the first thing we might do is learn about what types of implicit biases play out in organizations. This is mostly what those trainings are about. And then we go to the next part of the cycle is we build something. What we did is we built implicit bias training programs, and then we deploy them, and then we must measure. Okay, everybody who's had the training, does your behavior change? Does the behavior of your coworkers change? And most importantly, do outcomes change? Do promotions change? Does turnover change? And here the effects are not that promising. The effects are very, very weak. And if you were an investor deciding to invest in this startup, and I said, oh, we get some effects, but they're kind of weak, how much capital are you going to throw at that organization? You're probably going to ask more questions. Well, is there another way? One of the things we learned from doing implicit bias training is that not everybody feels good after these trainings. It creates a defensive posture. It makes people think that this is a fixed pie. If I lose, somebody else wins, and the only way that I can win is if somebody else loses. So this is a problem that has arisen because of the way we've talked about implicit bias. And the model would suggest, well, our training needs to get better. Now we have training on male allies, and that will change the way things happen. And then we measure, and we see, does it affect any change or not? And at this point, I'm making a pitch for, do we persevere and keep going around the cycles, or do we pivot? I'm saying, let's pivot. So pivot to a new idea, a new way of thinking about these problems. So I'm going to work through some of the problems in organizations using this idea of we're going to pivot and give you some examples of the things that this methodology could help us disentangle. And when I talk about the research that's being done, I'm choosing research that is very, very new, so some of it you may not have seen before. And it's really changing the way we look at organizations. So here's the big difference. Instead of focusing on individuals, let's focus on organizational systems, the practices and policies that are in place. It brings together researchers who study bias with researchers like me who study organizations. And the idea is we can build organizations that effectively interrupt bias. They prevent bias from playing out until the point of a pay decision or a promotion decision, or even a hiring decision. The idea of these interrupters is an idea that came from the Center for Work-Life Law. This is run by Joan Williams at Hastings, and she and I worked together on bias interrupters in the past. So a lot of good work coming out of this organization and a lot of free resources too, if you want to look some up later. The other organization that's doing a lot of work on this is the Clayman Center for Gender Research at Stanford. And they're doing some really, really interesting things with machine learning and language that I'll talk about today. But the important thing about the lean method in looking at this is that the method is calibrated to your organization. You don't need a guru to tell you what to do. You do what makes sense in your organization based on the measurements and the data that you've taken from your organization. So at this point, really, the guru should be just telling you the how you figure it out and not the what you should do. And fortunately, there are things we can do at every stage of employment. I don't know if this is good news or bad, but it means that there are lots of places that we can approach. I'm going to talk about two. So one place that we can start looking is in the beginning, before people join our organizations. So how do we attract people to the organization? How do we get them to say yes once we've given them an offer? Again, we have some unusual data here. So this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is the population in the US generally. This is the proportion of males and females in computing. And look, even compared to the rest of high tech, and even compared to Silicon Valley, in computing and mathematics, we have a much lower proportion of women, much higher proportion of men. So something's happening just in computing that's a little different from tech more generally. And sadly, it's even more worse if you are a person of color, if you're Black, if you're Latinx. So what this chart shows, again, what they're comparing is the number or percent of white people who got computer science degrees. Of those, how many of them are employed in a tech field? So if 59% of degrees are earned in computer science and we hire at 68%, that means we're kind of oversampling that group of people. Similarly here, 10% of computer science degrees go to Asian folks, and we're hiring quite a bit more than that, almost double that. So again, we're oversampling in a population. And then here we have the reverse. 11% computer science, we only hire 5. 10% computer science, we only hire 5. So we're seeing that in some groups, we're oversampling, and in some groups, we're undersampling. So here's some of the science. There's interesting science about what we say in advertisements. And I know that our HR departments work very hard to coach us about what should be in our advertisements, but it requires a rethinking and a relooking every so often. So this was a really interesting study done by economists out of Chicago. What they did is what's called a field experiment. So these are people, by field, these are real people and real organizations, but they've been put into experimental conditions where we'd expect them to behave differently. And this research team actually put real jobs in real papers in 7 big cities, and they actually made sure that if somebody interviewed for a job, that it was a real interview, and that if they got the job, it was a real job. So this is very elaborate. And what they found is that they modified the advertisements in the different conditions. In one condition, it just gave the ad and didn't say anything about salary. In another condition, there was one added line that said salary negotiable. That's the only difference. And we saw differences in behavior by gender. Males were less likely to apply. Women were more likely to negotiate. And as a result, there was a smaller gender gap in pay after all of this was said and done, but the gender gap was narrowed because men were less interested in the job. So things are happening that we don't quite understand. There is a company named Textio that has made its business on language and behavior and trying to understand why statements like salary negotiable might change the way people react. So this is a screenshot from Textio. They basically look at correlations between language and outcomes. And they do this through machine learning. They have used thousands and thousands of training documents, training advertisements, and then they ask, how many people did you interview? Who did you interview? Who did you hire? So they have data about outcomes and inputs. And they're able to show us that the way you describe the same thing could be construed differently. So in the first case, you've got an example of wording where Textio has found you'll get more applicants applying to this job ad when we say we are an equal opportunity employer committed to a diverse workforce. We do not discriminate. Compared to, we are an EEO and affirmative action employer. Women, racial, and other minority candidates are invited to apply. Successful applications will need to comply with a background check. Okay, so we can make some guesses about why people would prefer the first ad to the other. But there are some other more subtle differences that the social science tells us is there too. So equal opportunity is more appealing to people than the idea of affirmative action. Affirmative action is perceived as almost like a handout, and equal opportunity means everybody gets a chance. So people see those things differently, rightly or wrongly. We're committed to a diverse workforce. Here, we're saying, okay, people who we don't have can apply. So these subtle differences will make a big difference, a significant difference in who applies and how many people apply. So we would want to know this. We want to get as many applicants as possible. This is a screen grab of the Textio website. I wanted to show you they've got a little demo that goes on. And when I push the button, you're going to see certain words highlighted, and I'll do it twice so that you can see what's going on. Textio, this is what good hiring looks like or sounds like. If people don't respond to your emails or apply to your job ads, you can't hire them. So Textio Hire unlocks the best language to engage them and puts it right on the page wherever you're writing. So it's augmented writing. As you're writing, it can give you ideas. It gives you the words you need to attract the people you want to hire, using language that reflects your values and culture. So here is an email ad saying, we're seeking a media buyer. And what you'll see on the right here is Textio's score that tells you how good your ad is. So I'm going to play it, and you can see how some of these pop-ups happen. Okay, so those changes gave it a Textio score that was more in the middle between a tone that sounded masculine and a tone that sounded feminine. And if you pay attention to the words that were switched, it's also quite interesting. So instead of saying a killer, see what they change. Okay, here it is. And killer media buyer, that tends towards more masculine. What if you said awesome? That's neutral. What about get your hands dirty? Well, that's masculine too, but let's not change that. What about instead of helpful, which is more geared towards a more feminine tone, let's say useful instead, which is a more neutral word. So the idea here is that tone tells you, let's get to the neutral. And the idea here isn't so much that we're going to make ads that draw more women. The idea is we're going to make ads that don't repel women, men, people of color, et cetera. So I think we're inadvertently repelling people rather than drawing them in. And tools like this can help us stop that. So if I were to create a little product or a minimal viable product, an MVP for this, I might start here. Wow, the science says that the wording in advertisements can change or increase the number of applications we get. So we might spend some time learning about what words actually attract and repel different groups. We might build a new ad, and then we could test the ad. When we use the ad, do applications change? Suppose we find the applications do change. Suppose we find that we've attracted a lot more white females. And now we think, well, that didn't work for people of color at all. Let's go back to the drawing board and understand how we can change ads another way. So in this way, you would iterate at a fairly low cost until you have an effect that you're happy with. And if you don't have an effect you're happy with, then you try something else. But a couple of cycles through ought to give you a pretty good picture of whether this is working or not in your organization. Another area where I think we kind of mess up and maybe don't realize it is in the climate and the context that we welcome new employees into. So either because we're doing information sessions and we want to attract young or junior folks to the organization, or maybe in your first site visit when you bring that prime candidate into your office, what do they see? So we know a lot of evidence suggests that when people don't feel like they fit in an organization, they don't want to join, and they tend to leave. So this question of fitting in becomes important here. Some scholars out of Stanford did this very interesting study where they looked at 84 information sessions. These are big Silicon Valley firms trying to get computer scientists to join their firm. And so these researchers just watched what happened in these sessions. And this is what they found, that in a lot of these sessions, the speakers would reference stereotypes. Things like the males would have talked about using Ataris since they were little kids, or taking apart and re-putting together computer hardware. And some of the women might not have done that as children, but they're trying to get into computer science. So you can imagine if the guys are always talking about something that they've been doing for a long time, that's part of their DNA and part of what they think is important, and women don't have that, it might make you feel like, I'm not sure this is right for me. A celebration of geek culture. So sometimes the artifacts around the room are very, very geeky. I mentioned the Star Trek posters. So again, this can turn some people off. And it's imperceptible. They don't know why it's turning them off. But what it does is it sort of primes this stereotype in our mind that computer scientists are geeky. Computer scientists are introverted, antisocial people. So if I'm not one of those, how do I fit? And this antisocial kind of connection that we've made in our minds between really hardcore coders and the people that they are can tend to push out some people who don't feel they're like that, who don't think that working 24 hours a day is a good idea, who don't, sleep in their office, things like that. Some of the other things they found were that the speakers were not very diverse. So if there was a female engineer in the room, she might be in the back handing out flyers. So not speaking is a problem. And if the women did speak, they spoke about things like culture. So this gives an impression that will exclude, that will turn off some people. And if I were Google and I saw these results, I'd say, we don't want to turn off people. How do we fix this? And the researchers had found some things that seemed to work. So in the original condition, half the women left in the middle, and most of them said, I don't want to work for this company. In the recruiting site examples where there was a diverse team, where everybody got a chance to present, where everybody talks about technology, and where the real world impact of technology is celebrated rather than the long hours or the hellish code that you're writing. And lastly, that there are multiple pathways into technical careers. You don't have to have started taking apart, your brother's computer at age 5. So even these things can become or make things more welcoming. Oh, I've never had a computer science class before, but I think I'd like to major in it. I'm good at math. So can I get in here? You want to be able to show that. What about the code that I'm writing? Am I writing code that's good for society, or am I just writing code that's fun and cool and that my colleagues will admire? A lot of people want to do something that matters. So these are some of the things that bring in more people rather than repel people. So think about your workplaces. What messages are being sent? How are desks aligned together? Do you have rooms of people where there's one of somebody and they can see it every day because you're in a big bullpen? I was at an area firm looking at a big bullpen. People love open offices. There are pros and cons to them. And there was one female system engineer in the whole room out of about 50 system engineers. And she was sitting off in a corner, and I thought, wow, what is it like to be the only in that room? Okay. So for first impressions, here's something I might try with this lean startup methodology. So we know contextual cues affect the hiring success. So learn about it. What is a neutral cue? By the way, nature cues are always pretty neutral. What cues tend to bring up stereotypes? Revise your protocol or maybe even the interview setting. So maybe it's something you try. Maybe you go out and have the candidate meet different people during lunch, or you go outdoors and do some interviews outdoors. You change the setting, hoping that you're changing some of the contextual cues that are actually going to draw people in. Does it actually work? Maybe, maybe not. Let's suppose you found out that by having lunch on the beach, nothing seems to change. So you might think about, okay, what is a stronger effect? There are some hints here, and I'd be really thrilled if you tried them. What about cues that emphasize the real world benefit? That talk about the applications of technology that have changed something, that have created efficiencies, that are still in place today after they were built 20 years ago, that are still helping people all over California, that are being deployed all over the world. What if we had posters and pictures of that? What if we had celebrations of that? Those are things that create meaning for people and make them want to stay in an organization. Okay. The second area that I wanted to talk about was in performance and advancement, because this is where that brain drain, that leaving of mid-level people can occur. So it can be a result of performance management, lack of promotions, and lack of fit. When Google and Facebook decided to publish their gender numbers, what they found is that the percentages didn't look that bad. 30% of the technology jobs at Google are filled by women, but they tend to be at the lower levels. So even when organizations give you these gross numbers, you have to look and see where are they. And if they're only at the lower numbers, then there's very little chance that most of them will start rising through the ranks. You need role models, you need aspirational kind of goals to get you there. Leadership positions in tech are held mostly by white males. We also know what happens to the women after they leave. They're not leaving work, they're just leaving tech. Okay. So the three main reasons people leave. One would be lack of role models. So this is a self-perpetuating cycle, right? If you hire more, you're going to get more role models, and over time that will help. Feeling like an outsider, that's a huge one. If you're the only one in the room, if you're the only one who doesn't get the joke, if you're the only one who isn't included in the softball game, if you're the only one who isn't brought to lunch with everybody else, you feel like an outsider, and that is not a good reason to stay in the organization. And finally, unclear evaluation criteria. This is a place where this is low-hanging fruit. We can attack this right now. I'll explain a little more. So your evaluation criteria, if it's not clear, you're going to have mismatched expectations, and then you're going to have a lot of bias creeping in global assessments because you haven't really thought through how you would measure the performance that you're trying to assess. Here again is some recent research. This is research done at the Clayman Institute at Stanford, and what they've looked at is language and performance reviews. Again, they're using machine learning. They said, hey, friends, send in your performance evaluations. And they started analyzing the words in the performance evaluations. And the corpus of their training materials got bigger and bigger and bigger. So now they have quite a lot of information about what appears on performance evaluations. And again, the results are kind of like startling. Okay. Style words seem to come out in performance evaluations. Words like aggressive, pushy, demanding, off-putting, difficult, political, team player, self-promotional. These tend to come up more for women than men. The words that are associated with success in the organization are much less likely to be mentioned in the performance of women. So here's some summary statistics. 2.5 more times feedback about having an aggressive communication style when you're a female. 2.5 times as many references to team accomplishments. This doesn't sound so bad, but when you work in a team, your performance can get really invisible. About half as many references to having vision. Vision is important in companies and at high levels of management. Half as many references to technical expertise. There seems to be this problem that as soon as people are promoted to management, suddenly the perception is they don't have any technical expertise anymore. But you do. About 1/3 as many people that are females receive feedback about outcomes. So you think about this, the kind of feedback you might be getting, and then you get to the point where I'm ready for a promotion, and this is the corpus of the feedback that you have. If no one can say that this person succeeded with the following outcomes and changing our outcomes in an important way in the organization, then how can you promote them? Okay. So you might make a change here. If we know that feedback differs by gender and race, and we know that feedback on outcomes tends to be distributed differently, one simple thing to do is have a second reader of the narratives and performance evaluations. You say, look for places where I'm talking about things that aren't tied to anything concrete. Flag those and tell me I need a concrete example or I need to take it out. Flag the words that are like style words, things that are descriptive, that a lot of times have bad connotations that really aren't performance-based. So have a second reader go through that and check those things and remove those things from the evaluation itself. Does anything change after that? Now, some of you may be saying, well, gosh, it might change, but it might change 2 years from now. So this is a spot where you might create a measure that's easy to take right away so that you can look for change. And here I would suggest a perception of fairness measure. Do you think the performance management system is more fair? If by asking and by doing this double checking, people perceive the performance evaluation as more fair, it's a win. And you don't have to say it's a win for women, it's a win for men, it's just a win. And the next stage, you might formalize the checklist and roll it out some more. Okay. So small little things can make big differences if you repeat these cycles and you learn with your own data. And then finally, I want to talk about this problem of invisibility, which I see a lot in looking at science teams. This idea that when you work in teams, women's contributions are somehow masked or not that obvious. So here are some research findings. When a woman actually possesses expertise in a group, they are seen as less influential. That's strange. Females are interrupted more frequently. And what happens here is that then your ideas that you've put out there are not remembered as being tied to you. Who said that? Oh, I don't know. Somebody did. Global assessments of performance are very, very prone to bias because it requires us to think in a really holistic manner over a long period of time. And our memories just aren't that good. So we're going to go with an impression when we have a general or a global assessment rather than an analytical kind of approach. And in mixed gender teams, women are seen as getting less credit. So that style word that says she's a team player is actually a little bit of a dig. So what can you do? So in your organizations, many of you work in teams. Do you have measurements about how individuals impact teams in your performance evaluations? Do you consider that? All right, look around. No one's raising their hand. Okay, Matt Hall does. But this is really common. It's kind of surprising. So you have people working in squads, teams, people working collaboratively in very close quarters, in very intense periods, and we're only measuring individual performance. Well, that doesn't motivate me to collaborate because my individual performance depends on me and no one else, right? Why should I waste my time helping a coworker if I'm only evaluated on me? So one idea is start evaluating people's contributions to the teams. So what are the ways that people in your organization produce value in their team? So it can be things like facilitating team decision processes, helping the team manage through conflict, helping facilitate disagreements in a team, helping to make sure that everybody's expertise is described, is used, and is seen as valued. Maybe you build new performance measures. Now, I know if anybody from HR is here, they're like, no, don't do that. Here, I might suggest sort of a shadow worksheet. Give to your employees and give to your managers a worksheet of measurements of performance in terms of what the person brings to the team. In fact, it would be even better if you crowdsource this. So you ask your employees, what do people do that helps the team function? If we were to measure that, what would you want to measure? So crowdsourcing that, come up with new measures. Maybe there's only 3 or 4, something easy. So both parties get it. The person who's being evaluated can recall and remember the times when he or she did these things, and the supervisor can ask about it. And then these things can be brought into that holistic assessment. And by bringing these things into the holistic assessment, we might get a broader view of a person's portfolio of performance. So do outcomes differ? These first few might not be visible for a long time, but perceived fairness you can measure now, and you can measure it 3 weeks from now, and you might see a change. Okay. So these rapid cycles of experimentation are things that we can try right now to try to interrupt the bias that actually repels people from our organizations. The keys about it are that you get feedback. And who do you get feedback from? Your customers, your employees. And these are fast feedback cycles. So you're not making a huge investment up front. It's tuned to your organization. So what you do at UCSB might look different from what you do at UCLA. You might get different kinds of responses to your crowdsourced, what do teams do, and how do I contribute? But the key here is that you can make sometimes small changes that make big, big impacts down the road. And I will stop it there with my wish for organizations that leverage expertise, that are fair, that are equitable, and that are the meaningful kinds of organizations that we all want to work for. And I think that some of these techniques can help us move in that direction. So thank you. Do you want to have questions? Do we have time for questions?
Bring it on, yeah. Go for it.
Does anyone have a question that they want to ask? I'll repeat it if I can hear it. Yes, sir.
Okay, I got an engineering degree in '79 and became a programmer, and then went back to Berkeley, got an MBA in '86. Went back into the corporate world and started trying to get my boss's advice, and they wouldn't listen to me. You know, things. I remember once I started citing some research, and my boss said, "No, those who can't do teach." I said, "No, those who researchers study the 20 companies, the 10 that failed and the 10 that succeeded, and we analyze the differences." But by then he walked away and wasn't listening to me.
Right.
So anyway, I stayed a programmer because they were paying me to have fun. But my question is, this is in the university context, we really want to do these things and we're trying to do things, but at least back then in the corporate context, there was like sort of a, you know,
Yeah.
the monkeys with the hands over their face and ears.
No, it's a great point. So sometimes our managers, our bosses, our organizational structures really don't support this idea that we ought to try new things, that research suggests that by how we behave in organizations, we can change the organization's success. And I think things are shifting a little bit, and it comes down to this idea of customized data. So rather than reading a management book and saying, oh, this is what Jack Welch did at GE. What a great performance management system he describes. 20% of the people get high evaluations, 70% get the middle, and the bottom 10% are fired. That was his performance management system. And he wrote a book, and many, many Fortune 500 firms picked up and started using that performance management system. Why? because it was popular, it was what the great Jack Welch did. But really, if you studied it, you would know that that's actually a terrible way to evaluate performance. It doesn't give you any feedback about what you're doing. If you have a rank ordering and you say, hey, you know, Sarah was ranked above me by three levels, I was ranked in the middle, what do I have to do to move up? And the answer really is like, you gotta get rid of Sarah. You know, this isn't helpful for collaboration. Okay. So what I found is that by messaging this as tiny experiments, low-cost experiments, low-investment experiments with potentially high payoff, these are things you can try a little bit at a time. And as long as you're not breaking the law, and you may need to make sure with your HR people you're not breaking the law, but none of these things I've talked about would tend to go in that direction. So small experiments, do it in one group of 10. Do it in one unit. Make it small, pilot test it. Some of these things even can be paper and pencil pilot testing before you actually roll it out. And if you have experimental data from what you've done, then perhaps you can show it and say, we think this should be a formal part of our evaluation. We would like to lobby for that. Can we do it? But I would start, we call this bottom-up process improvement. Yes?
I have several teams where there's one woman or one minority member of the team. How can I best support those individuals and also grow the team towards greater diversity?
So are you one of the women on the teams?
I'm the director of the group.
Okay.
So there's a lot of teams in my area, and many of them have, again, one member who
Great.
is a woman or minority.
Okay. So this is a big problem if you're the one person. So this is what this question's about. What do I do with, you know, if I have a team, there's only one woman, what do I do to support and to make sure that that person can contribute in a meaningful way? And here I would say, if you don't have a second woman on the team or a second person of color on the team, then it really is left up to the leader to facilitate that. So one easy way to facilitate that is just to make sure everybody gets to talk in a meeting. So everybody gets a chance to talk. If people are quiet, you can call on them. If people are nervous that you're going to call on them, you can tell them in advance, I would like you to speak about this issue. And then when that person comes in to speak about that issue, they're prepared, they're not as nervous, everybody's expecting it. The other piece I would really push hard on is interruptions and claiming of ideas. So when you see interruptions happen, everybody can do this. You can just say, oh, pause a moment. John was saying something. He was interrupted. John, I'd like to hear you finish your thought. And then I want to hear how you're building on it, Susan. So you can do gently reminding, stop interrupting, stop being confused about whose idea it is. And one of the ways we can do this using technology is we can think about tagging people with ideas. So in a meeting, if a female has an idea that was then maybe usurped by another and maybe co-opted as their own, which happens all the time, it happens all the time in science, it's very unclear to know whose idea it started with. But if you know, then you can verbalize it in the meeting. You can say, Janelle had this great idea. Remember what Janelle said? Let's go back to Janelle's idea. Every time you talk about Janelle, you're talking about the idea, Janelle. And in people's mind, then there becomes a link, and during performance management time, it's much more memorable in our minds that Janelle was linked to that idea. So amplifying, making sure people get a chance to talk, these are very, very important things for creating not just a climate that is more inclusive, but something that I study, which is the value of knowledge that is not used. And there are some catastrophic effects when people in a group stay quiet with knowledge that the team needs.
Hi. Have you looked at the data around increasing female entrepreneurship? And does that help move the numbers or help the balance in any way?
Great question. So have we looked at female entrepreneurship? And yes, I'm terribly sorry to tell you it's much worse. 3% of the venture funding goes to female-founded firms. the rest go to male-founded firms. That's an incredible mismatch. Part of this is how the VCs treat the female firms. Part of it is how the female founders react to the VCs. But again, some really cool research coming out. We've learned that the venture capitalists or the investors are asking different questions when there are male founders than female founders. So they ask male founders about the upside of their idea. You know, what's the greatest thing that could happen with your product or your idea? They ask women, how are you going to prevent a failure? So this, I mean, you probably should be asking everybody about both, right? But this little subtle framing that we're asking about failure kind of puts in our mind, ooh, risky, 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 you know, don't want to invest there. And the data on the risk of female-run ventures actually is in the favor of female-run ventures. They're longer lived, they're profitable, they tend to flame out less often. So the story in entrepreneurship is not that great, although a lot of the women who leave tech go start their own tech firms, which is, you know, welcome. But we're trying here here and all over other universities to try to understand a little bit more what gets women interested in entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial activity and helps them overcome this feeling of I don't belong. So at the age of like 18, 19, these are the kinds of things that we can really focus on and really help them understand they do belong and how they belong, and maybe get more involved in the process, see success, have female mentors, and we can kind of create the engine that way.
When you get to the measurement part, how do you ensure that the effects don't have bias in them, that the effects you're looking for aren't biased, especially if the group that you're with isn't a diverse group?
So when you say effects are biased, can you
right,
tell me
the
a little bit more?
outcomes that you are looking for don't have bias in them, that you're not looking with bias.
So here, you're right. Those outcomes should be objective measures, right? Not so much subjective, opinion-based measures. So the objective measures would be how many people turn over. So there shouldn't be bias in that number. There may be some bias in perceptions of fairness, but you can account for some of the biases there that are usually not very important in prediction. So if you're asking about perceptions or attitudes, then there's a little bias there, but usually the outcomes that we're talking about are concrete, measurable outcomes that are available really through archival data. Uh-oh, we're getting a sign.
Do you notice any difference with respect to equity, fairness, and leveraging expertise in large companies that have more women in executive roles, or do you feel like there's still a huge culture thing that may still be in place and it takes a long time to sort of turn that boat?
That's an excellent question, because we're at this, kind of strange place in the aging of our workplace. So about, people who are about 10 years older than I am, there's some research that suggests that the women who are of a certain age are not very nice to the women coming up. In fact, they're kind of like saying, you got to figure it out on your own way. I struggled, so I'm not going to give you any help. And these women may also be telling people, oh, just get over it. It's not a big deal. So there is a little bit of that. As those people, I almost said graduate, but retire, then we have, I think, a different set of people, a different group of people who are really interested in what happens to the generations behind us and who are curious about this very perplexing circumstance we find ourselves in. So in big organizations, what they see happening when more women are in leadership positions, they do see that the leadership climate changes, and most people are happy with the changes. It tends to be more collaborative decision-making, more transparent decision-making, less sort of ambiguous decision-making, where people don't really know the rules. Women tend to like that less. And so there are things that organizations have been doing that help quite a bit in sectors that where there are more women. Yeah.
Hi. Does Textio Hire have a free tier?
Yeah. You know, I wish they did. They used to have a 2-week free period, which I milked heavily. So beyond that, no, it's not free. But it seems to me, this is a California company, seems to me that maybe there should be some sort of site license available to us, especially if we want to teach about it, talk about it, and then use it.
What do you think, Chuck?
Good morning. Gartner research indicates that 40% of future IT people will not be techies, they'll be versatilists.
Yeah.
So won't that just innately help the diversity issue? And are we looking at that as future hiring in the UC?
Great question. So we're learning that firms like Google and Microsoft are looking for people with undergraduate backgrounds in the social sciences or humanities. How is it possible? How will they ever learn how to code? So what these big product organizations are, recognizing is that coding is rarely a solitary endeavor. You're going to be invariably working with people, either people on your team or people who are clients or people who are users. So people who have to work with users must be very empathetic, must not be very introverted and antisocial. So understanding these sort of social norms, but also understanding more broadly how to think about the world and decisions is very attractive. So these firms feel like we can teach you the technical stuff. What we can't teach you is how to think. So we are seeing more of that interest. Now, I have to say with our master's students, the ones that do not have technical backgrounds, they're still having trouble finding jobs that are technical. So they're hearing things like, what, you don't know R, you don't know Python? So they're actually having to increase some of their technical skills before they're really marketable if they don't already have an undergraduate degree in computer science, math, or science. So it's coming, but this stereotype of antisocial, nerdy, white male is really stuck, especially in Silicon Valley.
Good morning. So I have a daughter who has shown some interest in STEM.
Yeah.
Can you give some advice as to maybe a track or a direction that I should be pointing her as she's a junior in high school and trying to make some of these decisions?
I think one of the best things you can do as a dad is keep saying, you can do this. You're ready. You have everything you need. You have all the skills, all the qualifications, all the tendencies to make you great at this field. Opening up that dialogue, because I think a lot of younger women get really excited about this, and then they see something new, and they're like, uh-oh, this isn't me anymore. So sometimes it can be a matter of, when I was a junior professor and teaching at a business school, some of the people in the room used to like to quiz me on math. So they would like throw out all these finance terms and see if I could do, a net present value in my head. And I couldn't, even though I majored in math. And they saw that as like, pfft, right? So these little tests come about, and they come about in high school, and they come about, if you're in robotics, oh, that's the girl's robot. If you're in college, it's, again, isolation. So it keeps popping up, this thing that really reduces our confidence. And the confidence gap is pretty huge. So men will go for a job when they're about 60% qualified. And women will wait until they're like 120% qualified. So I tell the women that I teach, go through it. If you count it up and it's 60%, you apply for that job. So this is the kind of thing that I would be telling, young people. If you're 70% of the way, then you're ready. You're ready to go. And this kind of confidence can be helpful. Confidence that's created in terms of role models that we see. We tend to think about entrepreneurs as Zuckerberg, but really there are a lot of wonderful female role models. pictures in the office, pictures in the room, talk about what the trajectories could be, and really keep that excitement that probably exists now going a little longer.
Hey, I'm loath to be the white guy who interrupts you. One
Good
more
one.
question, and we got to get Eura
Okay,
on.
one more question. Yes.
Sorry, I'm chewing gum, so if I chew it, I apologize. Real quick, in a male-dominated sort of white male, as we just discovered or already knew, how do you avoid being the dad? So I hear this a lot where young, new employees of a female gender come in, and the guys are trying to relate, they can't relate, and there's this disconnect, and you see an unmotivated, struggling employee that you want to help. And you want to do everything, and so you're in this mode where you're like, I'm going to help you, but at the same time, you're like, well, am I trying to be, your dad? Or, you hear,
Yeah.
I just hear that. I don't know how to express it, but how do you avoid that while trying to maintain and grow a connection for a struggling, employee in a male-dominated workforce?
Yeah, important question. One of the things I might try first is to create a social relationship first, and I don't mean a dating relationship, but a social relationship. So what if for, the first 3 months of every, let's say, year when new employees are, appointed, we go to lunch with the whole group 1 day a week or 2 days a week. And we sit around the table and we just talk about not work. We just get to know each other. We talk about what else is happening on campus, a movie we saw. These are ways to get to know each other on something other than a technical basis. And you also find out lots of interesting things about the organization. So there are some things about the organization you want new people to know that you don't want to just tell them in a book. They're going to find out through conversation. So I might start there, and then the invitation to come ask for help may come from the person, in which case then you can make request to say, when you come ask for help, please have the following things ready. Have a set of questions where you don't understand, and then you can help in a very specific way rather than it being like, oh, I don't know what to do. So narrow the scope of your help and what you're asking from the person, and also add social stuff, I think can make a bit of difference. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the questions.
Hey, hello again. Hey, so I'm back again to give some sort of final housekeeping things before everyone gets started with the conference. Before I let you out, I want to make sure the one big important thing is to remember to wear your badges at all times. This will get you into food, into all the sessions and all the events. If you happen to forget your badge, go to the reception desk over at Corwin, and we will get you a new one and make a handmade name tag. But make sure you always have your badge on as you're going around campus, please. Let's see. And then also, if you, again, still need help for anything, look for the folks wearing the shirt, the polo shirt. And then also we have volunteers that are also wearing a UCTech t-shirt. So our volunteers who are going to be the hosts in the rooms, or the committee members, you will be able to spot us in our blue shirts with the UCTech logo on them. Okay. And there have been a couple of session changes. We sent this out in an email this morning, but just in case you're out of office and aren't checking email right now, a couple of the rooms have changed times or location today. So strategic approach to IT savings is now today at 3:30 to 4:15 in HSB McCune conference room, which is on the 6th floor of the HSSB building. Getting our head in the cloud is same time, so it was already at 11 o'clock to 11:45, but it's now also in that same room, HSB McCune, so to give them a little more space. Living our call to action is now in the MCC Theater, so that's part of the Multicultural Center, which is that way. And so over near where the UCEN is, that area over there, you can find the Multicultural Center, which has the lounge, a theater, and then there's a GSA area as well upstairs. And then partners and Reduce for Tomorrow, we'll remind you again this tomorrow. That is same time, it was on Wednesday at 2 o'clock, but it's now in the Theater and Dance Auditorium. And we've mentioned this in some of the emails, but again, if you want to keep track of these type of changes, make sure you have our schedule bookmarked, and also so you can check out your schedule. You have to log in to see your schedule, but you can navigate the schedule from your phone. So the website uctech.ucsb.edu and /schedule, that'll get you right to this, the full schedule, and you can also bookmark, each day, of course, is organized by the actual day. So make sure you have that ready. Each of the locations should be linked, so you can use the map.ucsb.edu that I mentioned earlier to actually get walking directions around campus. But if you have any questions, again, look for someone in one of the shirts, and we're going to have boards pointed out to point you around campus as well. And speaking of around campus, so again, the map.ucsb.edu, the venue map to help you get around. There's also a shuttle. Check in again at Corwin if you need to use the shuttle. And then the last thing, of course, is find a volunteer. If we can help direct you to anywhere on campus and show you where you need to go. Okay. Food. Breakfast, as you saw, was at Corwin Pavilion. That's where lunch will be again today, and also the Sauter Awards later this afternoon. Dinner will be in the same place as last night, that really wonderful spot over in Las Asinas Quad in Manzanita Village. There will be music again, more yummy food. And then there will be snacks throughout the day in the UCEN lobby, which is the same area where the sponsor fair will be. For dinner, if you need another option, please ask one of the catering staff, and if they, for some reason, aren't able to help, look for one of us wearing the shirts, and we'll make sure that we can find an alternative option, but there is one for every single meal. We just need to make sure that you can get it. And some of the fun things. So, bingo, in your swag bag, there is a card that has a bingo board on it. If you go to the sponsor fair, get stamped by the sponsors, you can enter to win a prize. You will have to be present to win, but that's something fun to, again, to go to each of the sponsor tables, thank them, learn a little more, get your stamped, maybe win something. And of course, our Instagram photo contest. I know people have already been posting a lot of photos in Slack, so it is going to be really tough for the judges this year, I can tell. So if you have not heard about it, so if you have an Instagram account, make sure that it's public. Post your photos, hashtag UCTech 2019 photo. We're pulling all the photos and adding them to our website photo gallery, so you can actually see the ones that are coming in now. And go there continue to take photos around campus, and then there will be judging and prizes for the best photo of this year. And the last piece before I let everyone go is the UCIT blog and community. So they were there in front of Corwin. Make sure you stop at their table if you have not signed up for the blog. I also mentioned if you have not signed up for Slack, the UCTech Slack page, and are in the hashtag UCTech conference channel, that's also really helpful. We're posting things there. People are posting photos, posting information, where they're going, the best place to walk to see the sunset, things like that. So make sure you join that community as well. If you haven't joined, if you go to slack.com and put in UCTech as the workplace, and then your campus email address, that will help to get you started and signed up, and that's open to all of us. So take advantage of that resource. There are a lot of other channels in there for different groups. And that community is really growing and really active, so make sure you join that conversation. So that's all that I have. I want to thank everyone for coming to the keynote. The sponsor fair will start at 10:15, so make sure you get over there and check out the sponsors and then head to your sessions. So thank you all for being here, and welcome to UC Tech.